no matter who you are or where you are on your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So it's a custom in this class to begin with some silence. So let's do that. Just if it helps to close your eyes, you can do that. Get your feet settled on the floor. Take a deep breath. Be here rather than elsewhere. And may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be in our end and at our departing. And may it be that because we are gathered here today, all of us grow in patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Okay. So next week, in here, we will have these two people speaking. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but Ann Johnson is a member of this church. She's one of our representatives. And I still don't know how to pronounce his name. Tallarico. If you've not seen him on YouTube, it's really worth watching. And so they will be here next week, and either Ann will be facilitating or Dr. McDonald will be facilitating a conversation about politics and justice in the state of Texas. And then on the week after that, just 2 weeks, the Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis will be here. So for those of you who are here, and for those of you who are watching online, I just want to say that up until today, we have limited the publicity of this to this community of people. Giving everybody who is either online or close, geographically close to here, an opportunity to register for the afternoon event. So after today, the publicity for this event is going to broaden. So if you've not registered and you want to be assured of a place on the Sunday afternoon event, I'm going to encourage you to do that within the next 24 or 48 hours. So that you can go online and do that to the Ordinary Life website. And if you have any difficulty whatsoever, call the church and you'll either get to talk to Gail or to Tim, and they'll help you walk through that process to get that registered. I personally enjoyed reading this book, and I would recommend that to you. Actually, she's got a great story in this book about the Good Samaritan that I'm going to be talking about a little bit today. And I won't probably get a chance to announce this again for several weeks. So we do have, as Roddy announced, this effort to have an online newsletter for the community here locally, so that when we have announcements like births, deaths, crisis, something else, or just to have a community newsletter that will go out once a month, to keep everybody informed of schedule and dates and that sort of thing. If you want to sign up for that, there's a sign-up sheet on the table in the back. It won't stop you from getting the previews and summaries. It will be something that you would get in addition, unless you want to opt out. And in response, I just want to thank you for these. These are the flowers you had for me in church last Sunday. They're beautiful. There were 2 such arrangements, and I took one of them home. Okay. All right. So I want to begin by saying that your image of God, and everybody has one, creates you. or your image of God defeats you. I was tempted to say the image of God you have destroys you. But the fact is that your image of God creates you. Now, the atheist among you will not like this, but there is a connection between what you think and experience about the Word God, positive or negative, and how you see yourself, indeed how you see the whole shebang. This is why good theology and solid spiritual practice can make such a difference in how you live your daily life. Theology, which actually means, if you remember what we talked about last week, words about God, logos, words, theos, God's theology, words about God. Good theology can build a wise, useful, beautiful world, or it can be used to denigrate, separate, and harm not only the human community, but the entire world. Most people's operative understanding of God is something they got from their tribe, usually their parents, or the culture. There is what Robert Bella, whom I was privileged to meet and go have coffee with, there was what Robert Bella, he coined the phrase civil religion, that we all soak up. And I suppose civil religion is in every culture. I certainly know it's in ours. This is the reason that you will hear the president and other leading politicians end every speech they give with, "And God bless our troops," or "And God bless America," or Americans, every speech. My father belonged to the Rotary Club, Service Club, Rotary Club. I don't know if service clubs have the clout they once did, do they? I don't think so. But I would go with him sometimes to Rotary Club. My father was slightly OCD. He did not miss a Rotary Club meeting for 55 years. Yeah. And I used to go with him to meetings, and they would begin. Somebody reminded me that this happens in other settings too, business settings, commercial settings. But they would begin every Rotary Club meeting with a prayer and a pledge to allegiance to the American flag. Every one. And the what? And the four-way test in Rotary Club. I've come to think, by the way, this is relatively new thinking for me, that we need to be careful when we use the word blessed. As a therapist and a spiritual director, I've been privileged to hear over the years hundreds of stories, mostly from men, about their lives before we began sitting together, and more often than not on hearing of the path that they followed to get from there to here. I've just been astounded and have said, you know, it's a wonder you're not living under the Pierce elevator. It's true. It's true. I've certainly felt that way about my own life. I can look back at some of my journey. I'm sure no one in this room can identify with any of this. But I can look back at things I've done, habits I've indulged in, relationships I've had, and I can honestly say it's a miracle I survived that. Any recovering alcoholic will tell you it's a miracle I survived my drinking. And that's being blessed. And we say that about all sorts of things. I'm so blessed. I'm blessed about the car that didn't hit me, the diagnosis that didn't turn out to be fatal, that we weren't among those who were laid off, and so on and so forth. But then I get to thinking, what about the kid who was hit by a car? And the diagnosis that does turn out to be terminal. And the person who did lose their job with all the losses that that entails, were they blessed? These words that you see on the screen are some words of Carl Jung that I trot out from time to time. They are among all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35. There's not been a one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. Now, though I could not have said this when I was a student in the seminary and got found by these words, I can look back from now to then and see that I have devoted my life to trying to figure out what that religious outlook has meant. Doing this work is called theology. And when we consciously enter the sacred stream, we leave the shore. And when we gather in 3 weeks, I'm going to talk about some of the things we encounter when we leave the shore and get in the sacred stream, things that we want to hold on to and things that we want to get rid of. But if we put away childish things, that's what leaving the shore is a metaphor for, and we use those things I mentioned last week, scripture, tradition, reason, experience, science, art, culture, and technology, to do the work that is required to receive the gift of grace that allows us to grow into the people that we are created to be, then we find a new path. Now that's a very paradoxical sentence I just said. So I'm going to say it again. If we do the work that is required to be open to receive the gift of grace that can transform our lives, then we find a new way of being. By the way, this is all reflected in one's political outlook. Good theology makes for good politics. Good theology makes for good social relationships. But bad theology fuels hatred and division. Someone sent me this. There is nothing like Christian love. That's enough of that. So last week we talked about hermeneutics and epistemology. Epistemology is how do we know what we know, or how do we know what we think we know, and hermeneutics is how do we understand what it is that we think that we know. Those are two important things. This class today is building on that. So I want to offer you a way of interpreting. It's not the only one, but I think it is a wise and useful one for hearing anything you hear from the Bible, anything you hear from a preacher, from a spiritual teacher. I wanted to offer you a hermeneutic principle that will be useful for you. If you read, see, or hear of God operating at a lesser level than the best person you know, then reject it. Because God is love. And that is a foundational hermeneutic that, had it been used in the past 500 years, would have ensured a much more positive history. And if it were being used today, it would create more exciting possibilities. For example, I mentioned to you last week that there are passages in the Hebrew Scripture where God, presumably, tells the Israelites to go kill every Canaanite in sight. Men, women, children, everything. And then God calls the Israelites to go and burn down everything in Canaan so that they can inherit the promised land, the land of milk and honey. Now, the things about this passage and others like it, these were used explicitly by Christians to justify coming to this country and taking away land and property from indigenous people. Now, if you look at this behavior from the Canaanites' point of view, or from the point of view of indigenous people, God doesn't seem like such a friendly sort. Based on the hermeneutic I'm suggesting, it's clear that this message of destruction comes from a God created in the image of people, not people who have been created in the image of love. Some people say, well, it's in the Bible, as if that makes it right. That's why good theology is so important. How a person deals with sacred text is how a person deals with reality in general. And how you deal with reality in general is how you deal with sacred text. So, at the risk of sounding arrogant, the fact is that it takes a certain amount of psychological and spiritual maturity to interpret sacred scripture. Vengeful, petty people can find vengeful, petty text. In short, and this is a line I got from Richard Rohr, only love can handle big truth. All of which is the introduction to the topic I want to teach about today, the role of myth and parable. Or, as I am calling it, Santa Claus meets the Good Samaritan and friends. Let's begin with Santa. There is a poem that critics say contains the best known verses ever written by an American author. And the poem begins, "'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring. Not even a mouse, you know it." This poem, along with an advertising campaign sponsored by Coca-Cola, created the image of Santa Claus that most American people have. This is from the mid-19th century forward. You can look all this up on Wikipedia if you want to. Because before the advent of this, people had a variety of wild ideas, different ideas, about how to celebrate Christmas, about gift giving, about who St. Nicholas was, about all that sort of thing. So, you know the poem, on the night of Christmas Eve, a family settling down to sleep, and the father is awakened by noises outside, and looking out the window, he sees Santa Claus and a sleigh being pulled by some really tiny reindeer. And after landing on the roof, Santa comes down the chimney with a sack of toys, which he delivers to the children, puts them under the trees, fill the stockings hung by the chimney. And as he goes up the chimney, gets on his sleigh and leaves, he cries out, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." And that poem became the basis for movies, musicals, and it's a staple of this culture's cultural religion. The cultural religion is consumerism. No bigger day to celebrate consumerism than Christmas. And in case you are not aware of this, Christmas is the only holiday in this country that, and maybe it's in all countries, but I don't think so. But in this country, it is the only holiday that is a federal holiday and a religious holiday. It's a powerful myth. So the visual image of Santa Claus comes from this Coke commercial, jolly old white man. The actual story, the actual human on which the Santa Claus story is based, that character was actually a dark-skinned Middle Eastern man. Just as Jesus was a dark-skinned Middle Eastern man. All right. Yes, there was a real person named St. Nick. And he is the one who is behind the Santa Claus myth. This is a photo of his statue in the cathedral in Bari, Italy, where I'll tell you more in a minute. This guy was born in 270 and died in 343. For those of you not quick at math, he was 73. He was a major player in the early Christian movement. He was actually in attendance at the Council of Nicaea. And many stories grew up about this guy. None of them is actual factual in the sense that we think of factual stories. But they're stories about his work among the parishioners where he served. In Turkey. In Turkey. Okay, this is where all this took place. And they were stories about his generosity and his kindness. So the story that's beneath the Santa Claus story is this. Once upon a time, there were 3 poor girls. Now I want you to notice that in these stories of transformation, 3s is a constant number. It shows up in myths, it shows up in fairy tales, it shows up in good jokes. 3 blind mice. 3 wise men. Jesus is 3 days in the tomb. A minister, a priest, and a rabbi walk into a bar. At any rate, these 3 girls were unable to have the resources to get married. That is, they didn't have a dowry. So one night, Nicholas threw 3 bags of coins through the windows of their house so that they would have the resources to get married. Now, whether that happened or not, we don't know. But what we do know is that the actual Nicholas was remembered for 3 things: his generosity, his kindness, and his compassion. So behind the myth of Santa Claus, these are the virtues. Nicholas became a bishop in the church in Turkey. He was originally known as Nicholas of Myra. And after his death, he was entombed in Turkey until God told some Italian Catholics, I am not making this up, to go raid the tomb in Turkey and bring the bones to Italy. But the raid was only partially successful. So today, some of St. Nick's bones are in Turkey and some are in Italy. However, later, some other Catholics from Venice went and raided the place in Turkey and took those bones to Venice. So St. Nick's all over the place. A few years ago, they had to redo the tomb in Venice. And because they had DNA samples from the bones in Mara, because they get those out every year and look at them, they compared the DNA from the ones in Mara to the ones in Venice, and the bones came from the same skeleton. St. Nick, who knows? You don't know about these sort of things. You know, it's sort of interesting to have this image of God as a grave robber. Or telling people, hey, you go rob that grave. Now, I have to be very, very, very careful here because I'm a 7 on the Enneagram and I'm prone to excess. And I've actually been to see St. Nick. Got within an arm's length of his bones. Pam Rowe, who is not here, And her sister and Sherry and I went to Italy on a pilgrimage with Peter Sills. We spent the first week in Rome, and until you travel with 3 powerful women for a week, you have not lived. It was some experience. So there's a month in Italy when they have the St. Nicholas Festival, and then it condenses down to 3 days. And I mean, if you put New Year's Eve and the Mardi Gras together and stretch them out over a 3-day period with all the alcohol and festivities and everything that goes on, you're beginning to get a glimpse into what goes on in Italy. This is a reenactment of getting the bones, get in the boat from Turkey and go to Italy. This is one of the many images I took of the parades that go. You can see the people on the side of the street. This goes for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks. I mean, there are thousands of people who come for this occasion. You thought the Super Bowl of the Olympics was spectacular? That's one of the light displays. And this is the church on the high holy event where a group of priests go down to the crypt, get the bones, bring them back up, and they have a mass, and we all are blessed. And then we go and drink some more. It's a wonderful experience, really. So, the stories that developed about St. Nick and about Santa Claus are myths. We know they aren't literally true, but they convey a meaning about generosity and compassion and grace and all those things. The word myth scares a lot of people. If I use the word myth and apply it to the birth of Jesus or the resurrection, I get very challenging responses. You mean to say you don't think that really happened? And sometimes the words heretic are said out loud, otherwise they're just implied. There was a time, like I'm sure I took Santa Claus as literally true. Santa Claus brought me a puppy, Cocker Spaniel. When I was a little bit older, Santa Claus brought me a brand new Swin bike. It was blue. It is the custom in our family to this very day to tag some gifts under the tree from Santa. And then, of course, I endured the inevitable disappointment of learning that Santa Claus was not literally true. Now, at this point in human intellectual and psychological development, one has a choice. One can stay stuck in that disappointment and never move out of it and apply it to everything. One can go back to a childish position. However, to me, it seems only when it comes to religion does it seem that some people who are capable of gaining advanced degrees in other areas of endeavor decide to go back to a literal understanding in religion, in no other area. That's why we devoted a full class in here a few weeks ago to putting away childish things. So when Jesus said that we should become his children, didn't mean that we should become childish. He meant that we should move to the next level. One of the things children know how to do is play, and myth is about playing. When you go to the alley theater, you see a play. A play is something that's made up, that everybody agrees isn't real, but we all agree to participate in the play to be either entertained or informed or in some way transformed. But it's a play. So is everything. One of the things that's true about children is that they love stories. I never had one of my children, when they were children, say, Daddy, tell me a fact. It was always, tell me a story. And often they would want the same story night after night after night after night. Stories are inherently interesting. They're captivating. You know, you're very gracious, and I love you, and you tolerate what I offer in here graciously. But the minute I start telling a story, the mood in the room changes. It's true. It's true for all of us. Our attention shifts when we get into a good story. A good storyteller can transform the world and transport us to that world without our ever having to leave our seats. I'm told that Native Americans sometimes precede stories they tell by saying, I don't know if this really happened or not, but I know it's true. So they tell a story. And if you read Braiding from Sweetgrass, you know that Sky Woman came down and made Turtle Island, and corn and squash and beans grew up, and people were peopled and animals were animaled. And that's how the world came to be. We know that something happened that we call creation, so we tell a story about it. Turtle Island. It's a myth. As far back as anthropologists and historians can go, they say that the species that became human had two ways to communicate. Now remember what we talked about last week, epistemology and hermeneutics. Add to that these two ways of communicating, the scholars call mythos and logos. Both were essential in getting at the truth. Each one of these has its own area of competency. Our culture's lost the mythos. Myth was regarded as primary. Myth was concerned with what was thought to be timeless and constant. Myth looked back at the origins and foundations of culture at the deepest level of the human mind. Myth was not concerned with practical matters. Myth was concerned about meaning. Which is why you're here. It's why I'm teaching. We all seek to add meaning to our lives. We hope that we can leave here and that this will have been a meaningful experience. Failing to be working on constructing a personally meaningful answer to why we are here opens the door for us to fall into habits of superficial living and everything that comes along with it. Cell phone addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, all of that stuff. Two of the resources that I regularly recommend to people who are interested in exploring this area are both by Jim Hollis. Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life is one of the best books you will ever read. And Living the Examined Life is a good book to use for your daily spiritual practice. It's 21 or 22 chapters. You can read each one in less than 10 minutes. Just read one. And the way Jim Finley taught me to read a book like this was that you read a book, you read a paragraph, and you write that paragraph down in your own words. You read another paragraph, write that paragraph down in your own words, and then you do the whole book that way. It's a great, great book. I try to reread this book once a year, the Living the Examined Life. By the way, just yesterday, I read that there's research now that shows that reading 30 minutes a day reduces anxiety and improves problem-solving skills. Makes you a better person too, but depends on what you read, I guess. So myths of a society provide people with a context that provides meaning for their lives. It directs people's attention to something beyond themselves. Now, I want to be very, very careful here because I'm trying to teach two things that I want you to really embrace or become aware of. Everybody in this room, every one of us lives by a myth. We may not be aware of it, but we have it, maybe more than one. That's one of the things I want to communicate. The other thing I want to communicate is not all myths are good. Not all myths are useful. The myth of manifest destiny that allowed white European males to come to this country and decimate indigenous people, that's not a good myth, particularly if you're an indigenous person. The myth that Jews were God's chosen people that allowed them to slaughter the Canaanites, that's not a good myth. Further, if you're Jewish and you hold to the we are the chosen people myth, things like the Holocaust and the October 7th attack by Hamas that left over 1,200 Jews dead, those are hard things to swallow. Why would God do that to God's chosen people? So myths are deeply rooted in the unconscious. They're deeply rooted in the collective unconscious. So that in other eras, when people told stories, and you turn to the Greeks primarily for this, but when people told stories about heroes that descended into the underworld and defeated what was there and came forth heroic, what they were doing was giving manifestation of going into the dark unconscious, the shadow, and bringing into light that which is unconscious in the culture and that which is unconscious in all of us. Myths are not accessible to rational investigation, but they're operative and they have a profound effect on all of us. All of us can be captured by those forces from the deep that cause us to live our lives as either heroes or very destructive or other destructive people. Now, we can see easily the damage of the myth of white Aryan supremacy that the Germans embraced. We can see that. It's more difficult to see the white supremacist myth that's run this country. Wise and useful myths come from wise and useful epistemology. And they require two things: ritual and hermeneutics for deeper meaning. Oh, I'd like to take a break here and I'd like for you to enjoy some music. Nice, isn't it? You like it?
Too many notes.
Too many notes. This is a Chopin prelude. And a picture by itself means nothing, unless you're a musical savant. It's not satisfying. It's an abstract experience. You need somebody to interpret this instrumentally. And not somebody just to play the notes mechanically. You need somebody who knows Chopin, who knows Chopin's history, who knows this piece of music, who knows the whole work of Chopin, who knows how other artists have interpreted this work, and they can sit at the piano and reproduce a version of this that is enlightening. But just reading this does nothing. Now, I want you to apply what I just said to the Bible. To bring this much closer to home and to our own inherited tradition, the people who crafted the stories about Jesus, the myths about Jesus, had a very different worldview than we have. They were much less interested in what happened than in the meaning of what happened. So at the time of Jesus, or after the time of Jesus, say 3 decades after the death of Jesus, if you'd gone up to someone and said, hey, I've decided to follow Jesus. Oh, really? Why? Well, you know he was born of a virgin. So? Well, what does that mean? So was our God. Really? Yeah. Our God is called the Prince of Peace. Oh, okay. Our God is called the Son of God. Oh, I didn't know that. I'm referring to Augustus here. Those were the titles used by Augustus, used for Augustus. Prince of Peace, Son of God. The Christian writers just appropriated those titles and put them on Jesus. Augustus was born of a virgin, kind of. There was a miraculous union. You're going to have a hard time believing this. There was a miraculous union between Apollo and his mother when Apollo turned into a snake and went into Augustus' mother and impregnated her, then came out and became Apollo again. And people in that world said, okay, makes sense to me. But they didn't take it literally. That would have been logos. They took it mythologically. So, a one-sentence summary of what I've tried to teach so far today is that myth is the symbol system out of which we live. Every one of us, whether we are aware of it or not, has a myth out of which we live. Even those people who hate the word myth have a myth. It's largely unconscious. Some psychologists say it's pre-rational. But it is one of the most misunderstood words in our language, and it is a shame that it has come to mean falsehood. In fact, your myth is the truth you live by. Our myths create a livable world, create a sane world. Of course, as a myth, if a myth is destructive, as I've alluded to, it creates a destructive world. A line I got from Buddhism decades ago, but used frequently as a test for creating my own path to walk, is this wise? Is this useful? Is it benefit everyone? That's a myth. A wise and useful myth creates a livable, meaningful world for ourselves and others. A parable, however, confronts our world, subverts our world. A parable does not create, a parable destroys and then recreates. A parable seeks to deconstruct our useless myths and put more useful ones in their place. So, meet the Good Samaritan. This is Van Gogh's representation. Okay, let's have a quick class review. What was Jesus' creed? Trick question. He didn't have one. Trick question. He didn't have one. He was a Jew. Jews didn't have beliefs. They had mandates. That's where we get the word Maundy Thursday from. Jesus gave a new mandate. So the law in Judaism was you're to love your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And Your neighbor as yourself. That was Jesus' creed. That, by the way, is the teaching that's at the heart of the first axial age. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But, said one of Jesus' parishioners, surely you don't mean everyone. Not those despicable people coming across the border to take our jobs and live off food stamps. Jesus gave him an eye roll. And then he told a story, and you know it. A man, presumably Jewish, was traveling between Jerusalem and Jericho when he got carjacked, set upon by a gang of thugs who not only took everything he had but left him for dead. Two of the highest ranking religious political leaders of the day passed by this victim of crime, surveyed the situation, and for their own reasons, which we do not know but can easily assume, they kept on going. We can easily assume the reasons because they're the ones we use. I'm not being judgmental, I'm talking about myself. Then along comes this Samaritan. Now Jesus is telling a story to Jews about an event that happened to a Jew. And so far, the Jewish heroes of the story had failed the test miserably. Then it comes along the most despised person on the list of people to despise by Jews, a Samaritan. And he went to the victim, rendered first aid, put him on his own animal, took him to the closest Hyatt Regency, put him in a first-class room, gave the hotel his Gold American Express card, and said, take care of him, whatever it takes, charge it to my account. I'll be back in a few days to wrap up things. Now, who, said Jesus, do you think was neighbor to the man? He was such a genius at telling stories like that. So parables don't call for a debate or questioning. It's not about information. It's an encounter. And often a very uncomfortable encounter. Not because God is uncomfortable, but because the parable challenges and seeks to correct the myth by which we have been living. And in this case, the myth is that Samaritans are no-gooders from start to finish, all the way to the bone, but not in this story. So a good parable does not lend itself to analysis. It doesn't lead to that. It's either a life-transforming insight, or you get up and walk out. You got that choice. Resume business as usual. So a parable calls for decision, for a change in perspective. Recently, the clergy here at St. Paul's were asked to participate in a poll of sorts. In an effort to build a curriculum for this year's confirmation class, we were asked to submit a list of what our 2 or 3 favorite parables were. Now, I think that is their sneaky way to try to rope us into teaching about them, which I won't do, but I have this meme somebody sent me years ago that shows Jesus sitting on a mountainside speaking to a crowd, and he's saying, before I say anything, now listen carefully, I don't want to end up with 4 versions of this. Well, depending on which version you look at in the Christian collection of scriptures, there are between 30 and 40 parables that Jesus told. The Good Samaritan is probably one of the best known and favorite for a lot of people. The parable called the parable of the prodigal son is one. It should be called the parable of the prodigal father, because it's the father's prodigal love that's the focus of that parable. But neither of those is really my favorite. My personal favorite, at least at the moment, and these things change, you go from time to time, is in Luke's narrative. And the preamble to it states simply this, quote, Jesus told this next story to some. This may not apply to any of you here, but anyway. Jesus told this next story to some who were complacently pleased with themselves over their moral performance and looked down their noses at other people. Okay. Yeah. Well, just try to identify with it. Yeah. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax man. Now, I just want to insert here, the church has made Pharisees look like crooks. They were really good people. Tax people were really despicable, truly. I think this is why it should be astounding to us, and it's just something that's passed over as, okay, Jesus called Matthew to be part of his group. Jesus assembled a posse of Jewish guys and then went and called a tax collector to be part of them. Can you imagine the infighting that went on during that assimilation process? Back to the story. The Pharisee posed and prayed like this: "Oh God," this is Tissot's painting, "Oh God, I thank you I'm not like other people, robbers, crooks, adulterers, or heaven forbid, like this tax man. I fast twice a week and tithe all my income." Meanwhile, the tax man, slumped in the shadows, his face in his hands, not daring to look up, said, "God, give mercy, forgive me, a sinner." Jesus commented, "This tax man, not the other, went home made right with God. If you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to be simply yourself, you will become more than yourself." Powerful teaching. So we all have these myths that we live by. It tells us who's the good guys and who's the bad guys, who's in, who's not. So one day at the synagogue, a rabbi, cantor, and a janitor are preparing to get ready for the Day of Atonement. And in the process of doing that, the rabbi is overcome with this powerful religious experience, and he falls on his knees before the Ark of the Covenant that contains the Torah, and he cries out, "Oh God, I'm nobody, I'm nobody." And the cantor who sees this is moved. And he goes over and kneels by the rabbi, and he too clasps his hands and says, "Oh God, I'm nobody, I'm nobody." And the janitor of the synagogue sees what's going on. He thinks, maybe this is a custom I'm not familiar with. So he goes over and kneels by the rabbi and the cantor, and he beats his breast, and he says, "Oh God, I'm nobody, I'm nobody." And the rabbi nudges the cantor and says, "Look who thinks he's nobody." The reason I love this parable of Jesus is it reflects what a genius he was at creating these stories. I grew up in a church where the myth given me on hearing this story was to label the Pharisee such a bad guy. Jerk. Kick him out. The myth I was given didn't allow me to see what a good man he was. A really good person. And the myth I was given did not allow me to see how like him I was in kicking him out of my heart. Jesus put the truth out there. He let those who heard it deal with it the story they wanted to. How you deal with it, that's yours to deal with. Which I think shows a really high respect for people's spiritual intelligence. It's as if Jesus is saying, struggle with what I'm saying. He doesn't qualify his point. He doesn't try to make sure, now you understand what I'm saying. He's not afraid to challenge. He's not afraid of being misunderstood. He just puts it out there. So today I wanted to raise into the awareness the myths by which we live and the assumptions we make about what is. That's epistemology. And then I wanted us to question those myths and to ask, are they wise? Are they useful? Are they loving? Are they compassionate? Are they just? Do they influence our politics? The way that we live with other people? The way we take a position about things in our society? I want us to live with and struggle with these very questions. As Rainier Maria Rilke put it, be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions. Do not seek for answers which cannot be given you because you would be unable to live them. The point is to live everything. Live the questions. And if you can move into that position, you can thank St. Nick and good old Sam. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, take care of yourself. Be careful because it's a treacherous world out there at times. And I'll see you here with that conversation on politics next week. Thank you.